The bullet that grazed Isaac Thornton's ribs in the summer of 1878 was the one that finally made him understand he was not immortal. And 3 days later, when infection set in, and fever dreams plagued him with visions of all the men he had killed, he decided that if he survived, he would never draw his gun on another human being again. He survived, though barely, crawling into Albuquerque, New Mexico, with nothing but the clothes on his back, a horse too tired to continue, and a reputation that followed him like a shadow he could not shake. The town sprawled along the Rio Grande, adobe buildings baking under the merciless sun, dust devils dancing through the wide streets where merchants hawked their wares and cowboys drove cattle toward the rail yards. Isaac found a room above the saloon, paid for a week with the last of his money, and collapsed onto a bed that smelled of tobacco and sweat. His holster hung on the bedpost, the leather worn smooth from years of quick draws, but he did not touch it. He had made a promise to himself, and Isaac Thornton was many things, but he had never been a man who broke his word. The doctor who treated him was an older man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose and hands that shook slightly from too much whiskey over too many years. He cleaned the wound, wrapped Isaac's torso in fresh bandages, and told him he was lucky to be alive. Isaac did not feel lucky. He felt hollow, as though someone had scooped out everything inside him and left only the shell of who he used to be. By the end of the week, Isaac was well enough to walk the streets, though his side still ached and he moved carefully to avoid tearing the healing tissue. He found work at the livery stable, mucking out stalls and tending to the horses that travelers brought through town. It was honest work, backbreaking and humble, and it suited him fine. The stable owner, a Mexican man named Roberto with a thick mustache and kind eyes, did not ask questions about Isaac's past, and Isaac was grateful for that. The routine became Isaac's salvation. He woke before dawn when the air was still cool and the stars were fading from the sky. He fed the horses, cleaned their stalls, checked their shoes, and brushed their coats until they gleamed. During the hottest part of the day, he would rest in the shade, drinking water from the well and watching the town move around him. In the evenings, he would sit on the porch of the boarding house where he had moved after his first week. Smoking cigarettes, he rolled himself, and listening to the sounds of Albuquerque settling down for the night. 3 months passed this way, each day blending into the next, and Isaac began to think that perhaps this was all his life would be from now on. Quiet, simple, safe. He told himself he was content with that, even as something inside him felt restless and unfulfilled. Then Amelia Lawrence came to town, and everything changed. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, when the heat had finally broken, and the air carried the promise of cooler weather. Isaac was replacing a broken board in one of the stall doors when he heard the commotion outside. Horses whinnying, men shouting, and beneath it all, a woman's voice, clear and commanding, telling someone to be careful with her trunk because it contained valuable items. Curious, Isaac set down his hammer and walked to the stable entrance. A stagecoach stood in the street, its sides caked with dust from the long journey. The driver was unloading luggage while a woman in a dark blue traveling dress supervised, her hands on her hips and her chin tilted up in a way that suggested she was used to giving orders and having them followed. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense. Her face was too angular, her jaw too strong, her mouth too wide. But there was something arresting about her, a presence that drew the eye and held it. Her hair, a rich chestnut brown, was pulled back in a practical bun, though a few strands had escaped and curled around her face. Her eyes, even from a distance, were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing as they surveyed her new surroundings. Roberto appeared beside Isaac, wiping his hands on his apron. "That is the new schoolteacher," he said in his accented English. "Miss Lawrence. She came all the way from Boston." "Boston," Isaac repeated, watching as Amelia directed the driver to carry her trunk to the boarding house across the street. "Long way to come. The town council hired her. They want to bring civilization to Albuquerque." Roberto chuckled. "Good luck to her. These children are wild as mustangs." Isaac said nothing, but he could not stop watching her. There was something in the way she moved, purposeful and unafraid, that fascinated him. She did not seem intimidated by the rough frontier town or the men who stopped their work to stare at her. She simply lifted her skirts to keep them out of the dust and marched toward the boarding house as though she owned the place. That evening, Isaac found himself taking dinner at the boarding house instead of eating the simple meal he usually prepared in his room. The dining room was crowded, full of miners and cowboys and traveling salesmen, but Isaac managed to find a seat at one of the long tables. He had just started on his plate of beef and beans when Amelia Lawrence entered the room. Conversation died down as she made her way to an empty chair. She seemed oblivious to the attention, or perhaps she was simply accustomed to it. She sat down, smoothed her napkin across her lap, and waited patiently for the landlady to bring her meal. Isaac tried not to stare, but his eyes kept drifting back to her. Up close, he could see the dusting of freckles across her nose, the intelligence in her gray eyes, the way her fingers drummed impatiently against the table as she waited. There was a restlessness about her that he recognized because he felt it too. The man sitting next to her, a loud cowboy with too much whiskey in him, leaned over and said something that made Amelia's expression turn cold. Isaac could not hear the words, but he saw the way her spine stiffened, the way her jaw clenched. "I am not interested in your company," Amelia said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "Please leave me alone." The cowboy laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Now that is no way to talk to someone trying to be friendly. You are new here and I am just trying to make you feel welcome." "I feel perfectly welcome without your assistance, thank you." The cowboy's face darkened. He reached out and grabbed Amelia's wrist, and before Isaac knew what he was doing, he was on his feet and moving across the room. "Let her go," Isaac said quietly. The cowboy looked up, his eyes bleary and unfocused. "This is none of your business, friend. I am making it my business." Isaac's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it, a reminder of the man he used to be. "Let her go, or I will make you let her go." For a moment, the cowboy considered his options. Then he saw something in Isaac's eyes, some echo of the gunslinger who had walked into town 3 months ago, and his grip on Amelia's wrist loosened. He stood up, swaying slightly, and muttered something about not wanting trouble anyway before stumbling out of the dining room. Isaac turned to Amelia. "Are you all right, miss?" She was rubbing her wrist, but her expression was more annoyed than frightened. "I am fine. Thank you for your intervention, though I was handling the situation." "I am sure you were," Isaac said, and he meant it. There was a toughness to her that suggested she could take care of herself. "I am Isaac Thornton. I work at the livery stable. Amelia Lawrence." She extended her hand, and Isaac shook it, surprised by the firmness of her grip. "I am the new schoolteacher. I heard. Welcome to Albuquerque." "Thank you." She studied him with those sharp gray eyes, and Isaac had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing right through him. "You are new here as well, are you not? I heard some of the men talking. They said a famous gunslinger arrived in town a few months ago and now works with horses." Isaac's jaw tightened. "I am not a gunslinger anymore, but you were." "I was a lot of things. I am trying to be different now." Something in his tone must have convinced her not to press further, because she simply nodded and said, "I understand that. I am trying to be different as well." Before Isaac could ask what she meant, the landlady arrived with Amelia's meal, and the moment passed. Isaac returned to his own table, but he found he had lost his appetite. He finished his coffee and left, but as he climbed the stairs to his room, he could not stop thinking about the woman from Boston, who had come to Albuquerque to teach wild children and start a new life. Over the next few weeks, Isaac found himself encountering Amelia with increasing frequency. Albuquerque was not a large town, and their paths crossed in the general store, on the street, at the boarding house. Each time, they exchanged polite greetings and perhaps a few words about the weather or the town. Isaac learned that Amelia was indeed from Boston, that she had taught at a private school there before accepting the position in New Mexico, and that she lived alone, having never married. "I had a fiancé once," she told him one afternoon as they stood in the shade of the general store's awning, watching a dust storm roll across the desert in the distance. "He decided that I was too opinionated and too independent for his taste. He married a quieter woman, someone who would not challenge him." "Sounds like you had a lucky escape," Isaac said. Amelia smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "That is exactly what I thought, though my family did not see it that way. They were horrified when I announced I was moving to the frontier. My mother predicted I would be scalped by Indians within a month." "The Apache have not raided this area in years," Isaac said. "You are probably safer here than in Boston." "I feel safer here," Amelia admitted. "Back home, I was always being watched, judged, measured against expectations I could never meet. Here, I can be myself." Isaac understood that better than she knew. He had spent his entire life being someone else, playing the role of the gunslinger, the outlaw, the man who was faster than everyone else. It had been exhausting, and the price had been too high. Now, working at the livery stable, he was just Isaac, and there was a freedom in that he had never expected. As November arrived and the nights grew colder, Isaac realized that he was looking forward to his encounters with Amelia. She was unlike anyone he had ever known. She had a sharp wit and a quick mind, and she was not afraid to speak her opinions, even when they were unpopular. She told him about her students, about the challenges of teaching children who had never been in a classroom before, about her plans to establish a proper school building instead of the cramped room above the mercantile, where she currently held classes. "I want to make a difference here," she said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sun set behind the Sandia Mountains. "I want these children to have opportunities, to know that there is more to life than just surviving." "That is a good dream," Isaac said. "Do you have dreams, Isaac?" The question caught him off guard. He had spent so long just trying to get through each day that he had not thought about the future in any meaningful way. But sitting there with Amelia, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple, he found himself wanting things he had not allowed himself to want in years. "I dream about being at peace," he said finally. "About not waking up in the middle of the night thinking about all the things I have done wrong." Amelia was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and placed her hand on his. Her touch was warm, and Isaac felt something inside him loosen, some knot he had been carrying for too long. "We all have things we regret," she said softly, "but we cannot let them define us forever. At some point we have to forgive ourselves and move forward." "Is that what you did?" "I am trying." She squeezed his hand and then let go, but the warmth of her touch lingered. "It is harder than I thought it would be." Winter came to Albuquerque, not harsh but cool enough that frost covered the ground in the mornings and people wore coats when they ventured outside. Isaac continued his work at the livery stable, and Amelia continued teaching her students. They fell into a pattern of meeting in the evenings, sometimes at the boarding house, sometimes taking walks through the quiet streets, talking about everything and nothing. Isaac found himself telling Amelia things he had never told anyone. About his childhood in Kansas, about how his father had been killed in a bar fight when Isaac was 12, about how he had learned to use a gun to protect his mother and younger sister, about how he had gotten a reputation without really trying, and how that reputation had followed him from town to town, bringing trouble wherever he went. "I never wanted to be a gunslinger," he said one night as they stood by the Rio Grande, watching the moonlight dance on the water. "I just wanted to survive, but every time I drew my gun it got easier, and the easier it got the more people wanted to test me, until one day I looked in the mirror and did not recognize the man looking back at me." "But you stopped," Amelia said. "You walked away." "That takes more courage than anything else. Sometimes it does not feel like courage, sometimes it feels like cowardice." "It is not." Her voice was fierce. "You chose to change your life, Isaac. You chose to be better. That is the bravest thing anyone can do." Isaac wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that he could leave his past behind, that he could build something new here in Albuquerque. And when he was with Amelia, it almost seemed possible. As the weeks turned into months, Isaac realized he was falling in love with her. It happened gradually, so slowly that he did not notice until it was already done. He loved the way she challenged him, the way she never accepted easy answers, the way she looked at the world with such determination to make it better. He loved her laugh, rare and genuine, and the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking. He loved her strength and her vulnerability, the way she trusted him with her fears and her dreams. But he did not tell her. How could he? What did he have to offer a woman like Amelia Lawrence? He was a former gunslinger with nothing to his name, working at a stable for barely enough money to pay for his room and board. She deserved someone better, someone who had not spent years killing people for money and reputation. The town of Albuquerque was planning a Christmas celebration, and Amelia threw herself into organizing it with the same energy she brought to everything else. She recruited Isaac to help build a stage in the town square where the children would perform songs and recitations. He spent his evenings after work sawing lumber and hammering nails, while Amelia supervised and made adjustments to her plans. "It needs to be higher," she said, hands on her hips as she studied the platform they had constructed. "The people in the back will not be able to see." Isaac wiped sweat from his forehead, even though the December air was cool. "Higher means more lumber, which means more money. Then we will find more money." Amelia's jaw was set in that stubborn way he had come to recognize. "This is important, Isaac. These children have never had anything like this before. I want it to be perfect." So Isaac made it higher, and when Christmas Eve arrived, the stage stood in the center of the square, decorated with pine boughs and ribbons that Amelia and her students had made. The entire town turned out for the celebration, bundled in coats and scarves, their breath misting in the cold air. Isaac stood at the back of the crowd, watching as Amelia's students performed. They sang carols and recited poetry, and though they made mistakes and stumbled over words, the pride on their faces and the joy in their voices made it all worthwhile. Amelia stood to the side of the stage, beaming like a proud mother, and Isaac felt his heart swell with an emotion so powerful, it almost frightened him. After the performance, there was dancing and food and laughter. Isaac found himself pulled into the festivities, despite his natural inclination to remain on the edges. He danced with the landlady and with Roberto's wife, and with several other women before Amelia appeared at his elbow. "You have been avoiding me," she said, though there was no accusation in her tone, only curiosity. "I have been busy," Isaac said, which was not entirely a lie. Too busy to dance with the woman who made you build that stage 3 times. Isaac laughed despite himself. When you put it that way, I suppose I owe you a dance. He led her to where other couples were moving to the music provided by a fiddle player and a man with a guitar. Isaac had not danced in years, but the steps came back to him as he took Amelia's hand and placed his other hand on her waist. She fit against him perfectly, and as they moved together, Isaac felt something shift inside him. "I need to tell you something," Amelia said quietly, her eyes on his. "What is it?" "I am leaving Albuquerque." The words hit Isaac like a punch to the gut. "What?" "The school board in Santa Fe has offered me a position. It is a real school, Isaac, with a proper building and resources and a salary twice what I am making here." She hesitated. "I told them I would give them my answer after the new year." Isaac forced himself to keep moving, to keep dancing as though his world had not just tilted on its axis. "That sounds like a good opportunity." "It is." Amelia's voice was soft, "but I am not sure I want to take it." "Why not?" She looked up at him, and in her eyes Isaac saw something that made his heart race. "Because leaving would mean leaving you." Isaac stopped dancing. Around them, other couples continued to move, but he could not seem to make his feet work. "Amelia." "I know I am being forward," she said quickly. "I know that proper women are supposed to wait for men to declare their feelings first. But I have never been particularly good at being proper, and I do not want to make a decision about my future without knowing how you feel." Isaac's mind was racing. He thought about all the reasons he should let her go, all the ways he was wrong for her. But then he looked at her face, at the hope and fear warring in her expression, and he knew he could not lie to her. "I love you," he said, the words rough and unpracticed. "I have loved you for months, but I did not think I had the right to say anything. You deserve better than a man like me." "A man like you," Amelia repeated. "You mean a man who works hard every day, who treats people with respect, who helped me build a stage for children he does not even know just because I asked him to. That is exactly the kind of man I want, Isaac." "I have killed people," Isaac said, needing her to understand. "I have done terrible things. And you stopped. You chose a different path." She reached up and cupped his face with her hand. "I do not care who you used to be. I care about who you are now and who you are becoming. And I love that man, Isaac Thornton." Isaac kissed her then, there in the middle of the town square with half of Albuquerque watching. He did not care about propriety or what people might think. He only cared about the woman in his arms, the woman who somehow saw past all his mistakes and flaws to the man he was trying to be. When they finally pulled apart, Amelia was smiling, and Isaac realized that he was smiling too, really smiling for the first time in longer than he could remember. "So you will stay?" he asked. "I will stay," she confirmed, "on one condition." "What is that?" "You have to promise me that you will never pick up that gun again, that you will keep being the man you are now, not the man you used to be." Isaac thought about the holster hanging in his room, gathering dust. He had not touched it in months, had not even thought about it except in his nightmares. "I promise," he said. "That life is over. I hung up my holster for good." Amelia kissed him again, and the music swelled around them. And for the first time since that bullet grazed his ribs, Isaac felt truly alive. The new year arrived with clear skies and cold winds sweeping down from the mountains. Isaac and Amelia's courtship became official, and though there were some in town who whispered about the schoolteacher and the former gunslinger, most people were happy for them. Roberto clapped Isaac on the back and told him he was a lucky man. The landlady started making knowing comments about wedding bells. Even Amelia's students seemed pleased, giggling whenever Isaac came to walk Amelia home from school. Isaac wanted to marry her immediately, but Amelia insisted they wait at least a few months. "People already think I am scandalous enough," she said. "Let us give them time to get used to the idea before we shock them further." So they waited, though Isaac chafed at the delay. He spent his days at the livery stable, and his evenings with Amelia, walking through town or sitting in the boarding house parlor, always careful to maintain proper decorum even though all he wanted was to be alone with her. In February, just as Isaac was beginning to think he could not wait any longer, trouble arrived in Albuquerque in the form of 3 men on horseback. Isaac was working in the stable when he heard them ride into town. Something about the sound made him look up, some instinct from his old life warning him of danger. He walked to the stable entrance and saw them, 3 rough-looking men with hard eyes and guns on their hips, scanning the street as though looking for something, or someone. Isaac's stomach dropped as one of the men turned in his direction. Even from across the street, Isaac recognized him. Cole Masterson, a gun for hire who had ridden with the same outlaw gang as Isaac years ago. They had never been friends, but they had never been enemies either. Just 2 men doing the same dirty work. Isaac stepped back into the shadows of the stable, hoping Cole had not seen him, but it was too late. Cole was already dismounting, already walking across the street with a grin on his face that did not reach his eyes. "Well, well," Cole said as he entered the stable. "Isaac Thornton, I heard rumors you were dead." "I am not," Isaac said flatly, "so I see." Cole looked around the stable, his grin widening. "Working with horses now, that is quite a step down from the old days. I like it. Do you?" Cole's tone suggested he did not believe that for a second. "Because we could use a man like you. There is a bank in Santa Fe that needs robbing, and your reputation would make things a lot easier." "I am not interested." "Not interested." Cole's smile faded. "You do not even want to hear the details. The split would be generous, Isaac. More money than you will make in a year mucking out stalls." "I said I am not interested." Isaac kept his voice level, but inside he was tense, ready for trouble. "I am done with that life." Cole studied him for a long moment, then he shrugged. "Your loss. But if you change your mind, we will be at the saloon for a few days. Think about it, Isaac. This town is dead. You are wasting your talents here." He left, and Isaac stood in the dim stable, his heart pounding. He had known this day would come eventually. He had known that his past would catch up with him. But he had hoped for more time, had hoped that maybe, just maybe, he could build a new life before the old one came calling. That evening, he told Amelia about Cole's visit. They were sitting in the boarding house parlor, and when Isaac finished his explanation, Amelia was quiet for a long moment. "Are you tempted?" she asked finally. "No." Isaac's answer was immediate and honest. "That is not who I am anymore. But they know you are here. They could cause trouble." "I know." Isaac took her hand. "I will handle it, I promise." But handling it proved more complicated than Isaac had anticipated. Cole and his companions did not leave Albuquerque after a few days. They stayed, drinking at the saloon, making a nuisance of themselves and dropping hints about their plans. The town marshal, an older man named Griggs who was better at keeping the peace than enforcing the law, tried to convince them to move on, but Cole just laughed in his face. "We are not breaking any laws," Cole said. "Just enjoying the hospitality of your fine town." Isaac tried to stay out of their way, but it was impossible in a place as small as Albuquerque. He saw them on the street, in the general store, outside the saloon. And every time, Cole would give him that knowing look, as though waiting for Isaac to crack and agree to join them. Things came to a head one afternoon in early March. Isaac was leading a horse out of the stable when he heard shouting from the direction of the school. His blood ran cold, and he dropped the lead rope and ran. He arrived to find Cole and one of his men standing outside the school building, leering at Amelia through the open door. The children inside were silent, frightened by the strangers. "Get away from here," Amelia was saying, her voice steady despite the fear Isaac could see in her eyes. "We are just being friendly," Cole said. "Heard Isaac has himself a sweetheart. Wanted to see what kind of woman could tame the famous Isaac Thornton." Isaac forced himself to walk slowly to keep his anger under control. "Leave her alone, Cole." Cole turned, his grin widening. "There he is. We were just getting acquainted with your lady friend, Isaac. She is a real beauty, got some fire in her too." "I am going to say this once," Isaac said quietly. "Walk away, now." "Or what?" Cole's hand moved toward his gun. "You going to draw on me, Isaac? Thought you gave all that up." Isaac's hand did not move toward his own hip where his gun should have been but was not. He had left it hanging in his room, true to his promise to Amelia. But his eyes, his voice, everything about his posture spoke of the man he used to be. "I do not need a gun to deal with you," Isaac said, "but I am giving you a chance to leave peacefully. Take it." For a moment, Cole hesitated. Then he laughed, but it sounded forced. "Relax, Isaac. We are just having some fun. No need to get all worked up." He and his companion walked away, but as they left, Cole called over his shoulder, "Think about Santa Fe, Isaac. The offer still stands." Isaac waited until they were out of sight before going to Amelia. She was standing in the doorway, her face pale but her jaw set. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am fine. They did not touch me." She looked at him. "But this is not over, is it?" "No," Isaac admitted. "It is not." That night, Isaac could not sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Cole and his men, about the danger they represented not just to him but to Amelia and everyone else in town. He thought about the gun hanging on his bedpost, and for the first time in months, he was tempted to put it back on. But he had made a promise. He had promised Amelia, and more importantly, he had promised himself. He was not that man anymore. The next morning, Isaac went to see Marshal Griggs. The lawman listened to his concerns, but there was little he could do. "They have not broken any laws," Griggs said, "and I cannot run them out of town just because they are making you uncomfortable. They threatened Amelia, did they? Or did they just talk to her?" Griggs held up a hand when Isaac started to protest. "I am not saying you are wrong to be worried, but unless they do something, my hands are tied." Isaac left the marshal's office frustrated and angry. He knew Griggs was right, legally speaking, but that did not make the situation any better. Cole was testing him, pushing to see if Isaac would crack. And if Isaac did not do something soon, Cole might push too hard and someone would get hurt. The solution came from an unexpected source. Roberto found Isaac at the stable that afternoon and said, "I heard about those men. They are trouble." "They are," Isaac agreed. "My cousin, he works for the sheriff in Santa Fe. I sent him a telegram, told him about these men and their plans to rob the bank." Roberto smiled slightly. "The sheriff, he is very interested in talking to them." Isaac stared at him. "You did that for me." "For you, for Miss Lawrence, for this town. We do not want their kind here." Roberto clapped him on the shoulder. "The sheriff and his deputies, they will be here tomorrow. Until then, you watch yourself." Isaac felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, Roberto." "You are a good man, Isaac. Do not let anyone make you forget that." The next day, the sheriff arrived with 4 deputies. They found Cole and his men at the saloon and arrested them for conspiracy to commit robbery. Cole protested, claimed he had been set up, but the evidence was solid. They had been overheard talking about their plans, and a search of their saddlebags turned up detailed maps of the Santa Fe Bank and the surrounding streets. As the deputies led Cole and his companions to their horses, Cole caught sight of Isaac standing across the street. "This is not over, Thornton," he shouted. "You think you can just walk away from what you are. You are fooling yourself." Isaac said nothing. He just watched as they rode out of town, and when they were gone, he turned and walked to the school where Amelia was waiting. She met him at the door, and without a word, he pulled her into his arms. She held him tightly, and Isaac felt something inside him finally relax. He had been so afraid that he would have to choose between his promise and protecting Amelia, but in the end, he had managed to do both. "It is over," Amelia said softly. "It is over," Isaac agreed. That night, Isaac took the holster from his bedpost and carried it to the stable. He found an old crate in the back corner, placed the holster inside, and covered it with a tarp. Then he walked away and did not look back. Spring came to Albuquerque, bringing wildflowers to the desert and warm breezes that carried the scent of sage and mesquite. Isaac and Amelia set a date for their wedding in late April, and Amelia threw herself into preparations with the same energy she brought to everything else. Isaac had never thought much about weddings, but he found himself drawn into the planning despite himself. They would have the ceremony in the church, with a reception in the town square. Amelia wanted something simple but meaningful, and Isaac was happy to give her whatever she wanted. On the morning of the wedding, Isaac woke early and dressed carefully in the new suit he had bought for the occasion. It felt strange to wear something so formal, and he kept tugging at the collar, which seemed determined to choke him. Roberto, who had agreed to stand up with Isaac, laughed at his discomfort. "You face down outlaws without breaking a sweat, but a collar defeats you." "Outlaws, I understand," Isaac muttered. "This thing is trying to kill me." The ceremony was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, and as the hour approached, Isaac found himself growing increasingly nervous. Not about marrying Amelia, he had never been more certain of anything in his life, but about whether he deserved her, whether he could be the husband she needed. The church was full when Isaac arrived, packed with townspeople who had come to see the schoolteacher marry the former gunslinger. Isaac stood at the front with Roberto beside him, trying not to fidget as he waited for Amelia to appear. Then the doors opened, and there she was. She wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that one of her students had picked for her. She was the most beautiful thing Isaac had ever seen. As she walked down the aisle toward him, Isaac felt tears prick his eyes. He blinked them back, but one escaped anyway, and he did not care who saw it. This woman, this brilliant, stubborn, wonderful woman, was choosing him. Despite everything he had been, everything he had done, she was choosing him. The ceremony passed in a blur. Isaac heard himself repeating vows, sliding a simple gold band onto Amelia's finger, listening as the minister pronounced them husband and wife. Then he was kissing her, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was everything Amelia had hoped for. There was food and music and dancing, and Isaac found himself swept up in the celebration. He danced with his new wife, with Roberto's wife, with half the women in town. He accepted congratulations from men he barely knew, and endured teasing from those who knew him better. But through it all, his eyes kept returning to Amelia. She was laughing with her students, talking with the townswomen, moving through the crowd with grace and joy. And every so often, she would look over at him and smile, a private smile just for him, and Isaac would feel his heart swell with love. As the sun began to set, Isaac and Amelia slipped away from the celebration. They had rented a small house on the edge of town, a simple adobe structure with 2 rooms and a porch that looked out toward the mountains. It was not much, but it was theirs. Inside, Isaac lit the lamps while Amelia unpinned her hair. When he turned around, she was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Are you happy?" she asked. Isaac crossed the room and took her hands in his. I am happier than I ever thought possible. Good, she smiled, because this is just the beginning. She was right. Their life together was just beginning, and it was more than Isaac had ever dreamed of. He continued working at the livery stable, but Roberto made him a partner in the business, giving Isaac a stake in something for the first time in his life. Amelia continued teaching, and together they saved money with dreams of eventually building a larger school. They fell into a rhythm, a comfortable partnership that felt both natural and precious. Isaac would wake early and go to the stable while Amelia prepared for her school day. In the evenings, they would have dinner together, talking about their days, making plans for the future. At night, they would lie in bed together, and Isaac would hold his wife and marvel at the turn his life had taken. Summer arrived, hot and dry, and with it came news that Amelia was expecting a child. Isaac received the news with a mixture of joy and terror. A child. He was going to be a father. The thought both thrilled and frightened him. What if I am not good at it? He asked Amelia one night as they sat on their porch watching the stars come out. What if you are not good at what? Being a father. What if I make mistakes? What if I pass on all the wrong things? Amelia took his hand. You will make mistakes. Every parent does. But you will also love this child with everything you have, and you will do your best to raise them right. That is all anyone can do. You make it sound simple. It is not simple, but it is worth it. She placed his hand on her belly where the child was just beginning to show. This baby is a gift, Isaac. A second chance for both of us. Isaac thought about that often in the months that followed as Amelia's belly grew round, and the reality of impending fatherhood became more and more real. He found himself preparing in ways he had not expected, fixing up the house, building a cradle from wood Roberto gave him, thinking about what kind of father he wanted to be. He wanted to be nothing like his own father, who had been quick with his fists and slow with affection. He wanted to be patient and kind, to teach his child how to be strong without being cruel, how to stand up for what was right without resorting to violence. He wanted to be the kind of man his child could be proud of. In late January 1879, on a cold night when frost covered the ground and the stars shone bright in the clear sky, Amelia went into labor. Isaac rode for the doctor, and then paced the floor while Amelia labored in their bedroom. He had faced down armed men without fear, but waiting outside that door, listening to his wife's cries of pain, was the hardest thing he had ever done. Finally, just before dawn, he heard a new sound, the cry of a baby. The doctor emerged from the bedroom, wiping his hands on a towel, and smiled. You have a son, Isaac, a healthy boy. Isaac barely heard the rest of what the doctor said. He rushed into the bedroom and found Amelia propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up as he entered and smiled. Come meet your son, she said softly. Isaac approached slowly, almost afraid to get too close. But when Amelia pulled back the blanket and he saw the baby's face, small and red and perfect, something inside him broke open. He sat on the edge of the bed and carefully took the baby from Amelia, cradling him against his chest with a tenderness he did not know he possessed. Hello, he whispered. I am your father. The baby's eyes opened, dark and unfocused, and Isaac felt tears running down his face. He had held guns and killed men and lived a life filled with violence, but nothing had prepared him for the overwhelming love he felt for this tiny person. What should we name him? Amelia asked. They had discussed names, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, holding his son, Isaac thought about new beginnings and second chances and the life he wanted to build. James, he said, after your father. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. Her father had died 2 years before, and she had grieved his passing deeply. James Thornton, she said. It is perfect. Life with a newborn was exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Isaac learned how to change diapers and how to walk the floor at night when James would not sleep. He learned how to be gentle with something so small and fragile, and he discovered reserves of patience he had not known he possessed. Amelia recovered from the birth slowly, and Isaac took on more of the household duties while she regained her strength. He cooked simple meals, did laundry, cleaned the house, all while continuing to work at the stable. It was exhausting, but he did not mind. This was his family, and he would do whatever it took to take care of them. As James grew from a newborn to an infant, Isaac watched with wonder. Every milestone, the first smile, the first laugh, the first time James rolled over felt like a miracle. Isaac had never thought of himself as a sentimental man, but fatherhood had changed him in ways he could not have predicted. Amelia returned to teaching when James was 3 months old, and they hired a young woman named Maria to watch him during the day. It was hard for Amelia to leave him, but she missed her students and the work that gave her life meaning. Isaac understood. He had his work at the stable, and he knew how important it was to have something beyond just being a parent. The years passed quickly. James grew into a toddler, then a young boy. He had his mother's intelligence and his father's determination, and he kept both of them on their toes. Isaac taught him how to care for horses, how to be gentle but firm, how to respect the animals they worked with. Amelia taught him to read and write, to think critically, to question the world around him. When James was 3, Amelia became pregnant again. This time, Isaac was less terrified and more excited. They knew what to expect now, and they looked forward to expanding their family. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1882, a tiny thing with a shock of dark hair and her father's blue eyes. They named her Catherine, and from the moment she arrived, she had her father wrapped around her little finger. Isaac, who had been such a dangerous man who had killed without remorse, became the softest, gentlest father whenever Catherine was in his arms. "You are going to spoil her," Amelia said one evening, watching as Isaac rocked Catherine to sleep for the 3rd time that night. "Probably," Isaac admitted without a trace of shame. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The house was louder, messier, fuller of life than Isaac had ever imagined. There were scraped knees to tend and squabbles to referee and endless questions to answer. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely perfect. Isaac continued to work with Roberto at the stable, and as the years passed, the business grew. They expanded, adding more stalls and hiring additional help. Isaac proved to have a talent for working with difficult horses, the ones other people had given up on. He was patient and persistent, and he had a way of understanding what the animals needed. Roberto joked that Isaac had the same gift with horses that he had with guns, but Isaac did not find it funny. He never talked about his past, especially not around his children. As far as James and Catherine knew, their father had always been a stable owner, a quiet man who worked hard and loved his family. But the past has a way of refusing to stay buried. James was 7 and Catherine was 4 when a stranger rode into Albuquerque asking questions about Isaac Thornton. The man was a journalist from back east, writing a book about famous gunslingers of the Old West, and he had heard that Isaac had retired to New Mexico. Isaac refused to speak with him. But the journalist was persistent, and he started interviewing other people in town, asking about Isaac, about his life here, about the woman he had married and the children he was raising. The story spread through Albuquerque like wildfire, and suddenly, everyone was talking about the famous gunslinger who had become a stable owner. James came home from school one day in tears. "The other boys said you used to kill people," he said to Isaac. "They said you were a murderer." Isaac's heart sank. He had known this day would come, but he had hoped for more time. He sat James down and told him the truth, or at least a version of it. He explained that yes, he had been a gunslinger, that he had done things he was not proud of. But he had changed his life, had chosen to be different, and that was what mattered. "Are you a bad man?" James asked, his voice small. "I was," Isaac said honestly. "But I am trying every day to be a good man, to be the kind of father you and your sister deserve." James thought about this for a long moment. Then he threw his arms around Isaac's neck and said, "I think you are a good man." Isaac held his son and tried not to cry. Later that night, after the children were in bed, he and Amelia talked about what to do. "Maybe we should leave," Isaac said. "Start over somewhere else, somewhere my past will not follow us." "No." Amelia's voice was firm. "We have built a life here, Isaac. We have friends, a home, a business. We are not going to run just because some journalist wants to write about your past." "But the children will be fine. They know who you are now, and that is what matters." She took his hands. "You cannot keep running from your past, Isaac. At some point you have to make peace with it and move forward." She was right, as she usually was. So Isaac stayed in Albuquerque, and eventually the journalist left, and life returned to normal. But the experience changed something in Isaac. He realized that he had been carrying shame about his past like a weight around his neck, and that shame was poisoning his present. So he started talking about it, not in detail and not often, but enough to take away its power. He told James and Catherine age-appropriate stories about his life before Albuquerque, about the mistakes he had made and the lessons he had learned. He wanted them to understand that people could change, that one's past did not have to define one's future. As the children grew older, Isaac and Amelia's partnership deepened. They had weathered storms together, both literal and figurative, and they had come through stronger. They still disagreed sometimes, still had arguments about money or the children or how to run the household. But they always worked through it, always came back to the love that had brought them together in the first place. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Amelia to dinner at the best restaurant in Albuquerque. It was not fancy by Eastern standards, but the food was good and they had a table by the window overlooking the plaza. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked as they waited for their meal. "Staying here instead of taking that job in Santa Fe. Marrying me instead of finding someone without all my baggage." Amelia reached across the table and took his hand. "Never. Not for a single moment. You are my whole heart, Isaac Thornton. You and our children are the best things that ever happened to me. Even though I am a terrible dancer, even though you are a terrible dancer," she smiled. "Though you have improved over the years, I have had a good teacher." They ate dinner and talked about their children, about the business, about their plans for the future. Isaac had been saving money, and he wanted to buy a piece of land outside of town where they could build a house with room for the children to run and play. Amelia loved the idea, and they spent the rest of the meal planning their dream home. Walking back to their house that night, hand in hand under the stars, Isaac felt a contentment he had never thought possible. He had come to Albuquerque broken and lost, carrying the weight of too many deaths and too much violence. But he had found Amelia, and she had helped him build a new life, a good life, a life worth living. The years continued to pass. James grew into a serious young man who loved books and learning. He wanted to be a lawyer, to help people through the system of law rather than the barrel of a gun. Isaac could not have been prouder. Catherine was different, wild and spirited, more interested in horses than books. She reminded Isaac of himself, and sometimes that worried him. But she had her mother's good heart and strong moral compass, and he trusted that she would find her way. When James was 15 and Catherine was 12, Roberto decided to retire. He offered to sell Isaac his share of the stable, and Isaac accepted. It took nearly all their savings, but it was worth it. The stable was his now, his and Amelia's, a tangible symbol of how far he had come. They renamed it Thornton Stables, and Isaac felt a surge of pride every time he saw the sign. His name, once associated with violence and death, now represented honest work and community service. It was redemption, as complete as he could hope for. The town of Albuquerque grew and changed around them. The railroad brought more people, more commerce, more opportunities. Amelia's school got a proper building, and she hired 2 assistant teachers to help handle the growing number of students. The Wild West was becoming less wild, and Isaac was glad for it. He wanted his children to grow up in a world where disputes were settled with words instead of bullets, where the law mattered more than who could draw fastest. On a warm evening in June 1892, Isaac sat on the porch of the house he had built on the land outside of town. James was away at university in California, and Catherine was inside helping her mother prepare dinner. Isaac was 52 years old, and he felt every one of those years in his joints and muscles. But he was happy, truly happy, in a way he had never been in his younger days. Amelia came out and sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. Her hair was streaked with gray now, and there were lines around her eyes and mouth. But to Isaac, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her stepping off that stage coach. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just how lucky I am," Isaac said. "How different my life could have been if that bullet had killed me, or if I had never come to Albuquerque, or if you had taken that job in Santa Fe." "But none of those things happened," Amelia said. "You survived, you came here, I stayed. And we built this life together." "Best decision I ever made," Isaac said, hanging up that holster. "Best decision I ever made was staying," Amelia replied. "You were my reason to stay, Isaac, you still are." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Somewhere in the house, Catherine was singing, her voice clear and sweet. In California, James was studying for his exams, working toward the future he had chosen. And here on this porch, Isaac and Amelia sat together, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. Isaac thought about the man he used to be, the gunslinger who had killed without hesitation, who had lived on the edge of death every single day. That man felt like a stranger now, someone Isaac had known long ago but no longer recognized. He had become someone new, someone better, and it was all because of the woman beside him. "I love you," he said, words he never grew tired of saying. "I love you too," Amelia replied, words she never grew tired of hearing. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, they went inside to dinner with their daughter, to the warmth and laughter of their home, to the life they had created together. It was a simple life, a quiet life, but it was theirs, and Isaac would not have traded it for anything in the world. The years that followed were peaceful ones. James graduated from university and returned to Albuquerque to practice law. He opened a small office in town and quickly gained a reputation for being fair and principled, willing to take on cases others would not touch. Isaac watched his son with pride, seeing in him everything he had hoped to pass on: strength without cruelty, conviction without violence, the courage to stand up for what was right. Catherine surprised everyone by becoming a veterinarian, one of the few women in the profession. She had learned everything she could from her father about horses and other animals, and then she had gone east to study at a veterinary college. When she returned to Albuquerque, she set up practice alongside her father's stable, and together they built a business that served the entire region. Isaac and Amelia became grandparents when James married a woman named Elizabeth, and they had their first child, a daughter they named Amelia after her grandmother. Catherine married a rancher and had 2 sons in quick succession. And suddenly, the house that had once been so quiet was filled with the sounds of grandchildren every Sunday when the family gathered for dinner. Isaac, now in his 60s, moved more slowly and his hands sometimes ached from arthritis, but he still went to the stable every day. He could not do the heavy work anymore, but he could oversee the business, could work with the difficult horses that needed his particular touch, could teach the younger workers the skills he had developed over decades. Amelia, too, had slowed down, though she remained as sharp and determined as ever. She had retired from teaching but still tutored students who needed extra help, and she had become involved in efforts to improve education throughout the territory. She was respected and admired throughout Albuquerque, known for her intelligence and her compassion. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party. It seemed like half the town showed up to celebrate with them, and Isaac was overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection. These people, who had once viewed him with suspicion and fear, now counted him as a friend and neighbor. It was more than he had ever hoped for. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Isaac and Amelia sat together in their bedroom. Amelia was brushing out her hair, now completely gray, and Isaac was unlacing his boots, which had grown tight on his swollen feet. 25 years, Amelia said, meeting his eyes in the mirror. Can you believe it? Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever. Isaac set his boots aside and went to stand behind her. He took the brush from her hand and gently ran it through her hair, something he had done countless times over the years. Best 25 years of my life. Mine too. Amelia leaned back against him. Do you remember how scared we both were? You thought you did not deserve me, and I thought I was being too forward, too improper. You were improper, Isaac said with a smile. That was one of the things I loved most about you. Still love, I hope. Still love, Isaac confirmed. Always will. They stood like that for a long moment, comfortable in the silence that comes from years of knowing each other completely. Then, Amelia turned and wrapped her arms around Isaac's waist, and he held her close, grateful beyond words for every moment they had shared. As Isaac entered his 70s, his health began to decline. The old wound in his side, which had brought him to Albuquerque all those years ago, started to cause him pain again. The doctor said it was scar tissue, inflammation, the normal wear and tear of a body that had been through trauma. There was not much that could be done except to rest and take laudanum for the pain when it became too much. Isaac hated being slowed down, hated having to rely on others to do the work he had always done himself. But Amelia was patient with him, and his children were supportive, and gradually he learned to accept his limitations. Catherine took over the day-to-day running of the stable, and she was good at it, better than Isaac had been in some ways. She had his skill with animals, but also her mother's head for business, and under her management, Thornton's stables thrived. James's law practice continued to grow, and he became increasingly involved in the movement for New Mexico statehood. He traveled to Washington to meet with congressmen, wrote articles for newspapers, gave speeches throughout the territory. Isaac attended one of those speeches and felt his chest swell with pride at the man his son had become. The grandchildren were growing up too. Young Amelia was a serious girl who loved to read, just like her grandmother. Catherine's boys were wild and energetic, always getting into mischief but good-hearted underneath it all. Isaac loved spending time with them, telling them stories about Albuquerque in the old days, teaching them what he could about horses and hard work and treating people with respect. In the spring of 1899, Isaac turned 60. Amelia organized a quiet family dinner to celebrate. Just their children and grandchildren gathered around the table. Isaac looked at all of them, these people who existed, because he had chosen to change his life, because Amelia had chosen to stay in Albuquerque, and he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I want to say something," he said when dinner was finished and they were all sitting around talking. The conversation died down, and everyone turned to look at him. "I know I am not always good with words, but I need you all to know how much you mean to me. Every single one of you is a gift I never expected to receive. You are my legacy, my redemption, my proof that people can change and build something good even after they have done terrible things." James stood and raised his glass. "To Dad," he said, "the best father anyone could ask for." "To Grandpa," the children chorused, and they all drank, and Isaac had to blink back tears. That night, lying in bed with Amelia, Isaac said, "I am ready, you know. When my time comes, I am ready. I have no regrets." "Do not talk like that," Amelia said, though her voice was gentle. "You are going to be around for a long time yet." "Maybe. But if I am not, I want you to know that these years with you have been everything. You saved my life, Amelia, not just by loving me, but by giving me a reason to become someone worth loving." "You were always worth loving," Amelia said fiercely. "You just needed to believe it yourself." They held each other in the darkness, two people who had weathered more than 3 decades together and knew each other's hearts as well as their own. Isaac did live longer, several more years in fact. He got to see New Mexico achieve statehood in 1912, something he and James had both worked toward. He got to see his grandchildren grow into young adults, got to meet his first great-grandchild, a boy named Isaac after him. But in the winter of 1913, Isaac caught pneumonia. He was 74 years old, and his body, worn down by decades of hard work and old injuries, could not fight off the infection. The doctor did what he could, but they all knew it was only a matter of time. Isaac's family gathered around his bedside. James and Catherine were there, along with their spouses and children. But it was Amelia who sat closest, holding his hand, refusing to leave his side. "You gave me everything," Isaac whispered to her during one of his more lucid moments. "A home, a family, a reason to live. I would not have survived without you. We saved each other," Amelia said, tears streaming down her face. "You were my reason to stay alive too, Isaac. You still are. I am sorry I have to leave you. You are not leaving me. You will always be with me, in my heart, in our children, in everything we built together." She kissed his forehead. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Isaac smiled, and it was the peaceful smile of a man who had found what he was looking for. "I hung up my holster for good," he said. "But I found something better. I found you." Those were his last words. He closed his eyes with Amelia's hand in his, surrounded by the family he had never thought he would have, and he died peacefully. A man who had changed his life and found redemption in the arms of a woman who had loved him despite everything. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Isaac Thornton, the former gunslinger who had become a pillar of the Albuquerque community, was mourned by everyone who had known him. They spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his willingness to help anyone who needed it. They spoke of how he had changed his life, how he had become a symbol of the possibility of redemption. But it was Amelia's eulogy that brought everyone to tears. She stood at the front of the church, her hair white now, her face lined with age and grief, and she spoke of the man she had loved for more than 30 years. "Isaac believed he was not worthy of love," she said, her voice strong despite her sorrow. "But he was wrong. He was worthy of all the love in the world, and I was honored to give him mine. He changed his life because he wanted to be better, and he succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. He was a good husband, a good father, a good grandfather, and a good man. And I will miss him every day for the rest of my life. Amelia lived for another 5 years after Isaac's death. She stayed in the house they had built together, surrounded by memories of their life. Her children wanted her to move in with one of them, but she refused. This was her home, the place where she had been happy, and she was not ready to leave it. She spent her remaining years writing a memoir about her life, about coming to Albuquerque as a young schoolteacher and meeting the man who would change everything. She wrote about their courtship, their marriage, the family they had built together. She wrote about Isaac's transformation from gunslinger to stable owner, from a man haunted by his past to a man at peace with his present. The book was published in 1917 and became a surprise success. Read by people throughout the country who were fascinated by this story of love and redemption, set against the backdrop of the Old West. Amelia used the proceeds to establish a scholarship fund for students from poor families who wanted to pursue higher education, ensuring that Isaac's legacy would continue to help people long after he was gone. When Amelia died in 1918, peacefully in her sleep, she was buried next to Isaac in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Albuquerque. Their children erected a headstone that read, "Isaac and Amelia Thornton. He hung up his holster. She was his reason to stay. Together they built a life of love." James and Catherine continued their father's work, running the stable and maintaining their parents' legacy. They told their children and grandchildren about Isaac and Amelia, about the love story that had shaped their family, about the importance of choosing to be better, of believing in redemption, of never giving up on the possibility of change. The stable remained in the Thornton family for generations, a testament to what Isaac had built when he decided to leave his violent past behind. And every person who worked there, who learned to care for horses with patience and respect, who heard the story of how the business began, understood that they were part of something larger than themselves. They were part of a legacy that had started when a wounded gunslinger rode into Albuquerque and met a schoolteacher from Boston. And together, they had proved that love could conquer even the darkest past. The Wild West that Isaac and Amelia had known faded into history, replaced by modernity and progress. But their story endured, passed down through their family and preserved in Amelia's memoir, a reminder that people can change, that love can heal, and that it is never too late to choose a different path. Isaac had come to Albuquerque broken and seeking nothing more than a place to die. Instead, he had found Amelia, and she had given him a reason to live. Their love had transformed them both, had created a family and a legacy that would last for generations. And though they were gone, their story remained, a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and the courage to start over. In the end, Isaac Thornton had been right. He had hung up his holster for good, and in doing so, he had found something infinitely more valuable than the reputation that had once defined him. He had found love, family, purpose, and peace. He had found Amelia, and she had been his reason to stay alive, his reason to believe that he could be more than the sum of his mistakes. And Amelia, who had come to the frontier seeking independence and purpose, had found something she had not expected either. She had found a partner, a love that challenged and sustained her, a man who needed her strength as much as she needed his tenderness. Together, they had built something beautiful in the harsh landscape of the New Mexico desert, something that would outlast them both. Their descendants continued to thrive in Albuquerque and beyond. The stable eventually closed in the 1960s when the automobile made horses less necessary. But the land remained in the family, and Catherine's great-grandson eventually turned it into a horse rescue and rehabilitation center, honoring the work that Isaac had started more than a century before. James's descendants included lawyers, teachers, doctors, and activists, all of them carrying forward the values that Isaac and Amelia had instilled in their children. They fought for justice, for education, for the rights of those who could not fight for themselves. They embodied the belief that people could change, that redemption was always possible, that love and compassion were stronger than violence and hate. The memoir that Amelia had written was rediscovered in the 1980s by a historian researching the Old West, and it was republished with historical annotations. It became required reading in schools throughout New Mexico, and Isaac and Amelia's story inspired countless people who were struggling with their own pasts, who were looking for proof that they could change their lives and become something better. In Albuquerque, a small park was established in Isaac and Amelia's honor, with a plaque that told their story. Young couples would sit on the benches there, reading about the gunslinger and the schoolteacher who had found love in the most unlikely of places, and they would hold hands and dream about their own futures together. The house that Isaac had built still stood, preserved by the family and eventually donated to the Historical Society. Visitors could walk through the rooms where Isaac and Amelia had lived, where they had raised their children, where they had grown old together. They could see the porch where they had sat countless evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains. They could stand in the bedroom where Isaac had died, surrounded by love, at peace with the life he had lived. And in the stable that had been converted to a museum, visitors could see Isaac's holster, the one he had packed away all those years ago and never touched again. It hung in a glass case, a symbol of the life he had left behind, a reminder that people could choose a different path. Next to it was a photograph of Isaac and Amelia on their wedding day, young and hopeful, looking at each other with such love that it transcended time. Beneath the photograph was a quote from Amelia's memoir. He hung up his holster for good, and in doing so, he saved his soul. I was blessed to witness his transformation, to love him through it, to build a life with him that proved redemption is real and love is the strongest force in the universe. Their story became legend, but it was a different kind of legend than the ones told about gunslingers and outlaws. It was a legend about love conquering fear, about choosing peace over violence, about two people who had found each other against all odds and had created something beautiful together. And though Isaac and Amelia had been gone for more than a century, their love endured, as real and powerful as it had been on that day in the town square when Isaac had kissed his bride and promised to be the man she deserved. They had kept their promises to each other, had built a life that mattered, had left a legacy that would inspire people for generations to come. The former gunslinger had hung up his holster for good. The schoolteacher from Boston had been his reason to stay alive. And together, they had proved that love could redeem even the darkest soul, that change was possible, and that the courage to start over was the bravest thing anyone could do. Their story was complete, their ending as happy as anyone could hope for. They had lived long lives, filled with love and family and purpose. They had weathered storms together and had emerged stronger. They had built something that lasted, something that mattered, something that would be remembered long after they were gone. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. A life well lived, a love well cherished, a legacy well earned. Isaac and Amelia Thornton had achieved all of that and more, and their story would continue to inspire and give hope to everyone who heard it. a timeless reminder that it is never too late to change, never too late to love, never too late to find your reason to stay alive.